Welcome everybody to this panel, which is a very exciting panel featuring the work of the Union of Indigenous Yahe Medics of the Colombian Amazon. I'm going to be speaking in English and in Spanish. I'll be translating, I'll be moderating. My name is Diana Negrín. I am the Associate Director of Chacruna Latinoamérica in Mexico. And I'm very happy to introduce our two speakers today. Me llamo Diana Negrín, voy a estar moderando y traduciendo esta mesa. Me da mucho gusto dar la bienvenida a la Unión de Médicos y Aguereros de la Amazona colombiana, UMIYAC, en particular Miguel Evanjuanoy y Riccardo Vitale. Entonces voy a presentarlos y luego de ahí ya vamos comenzando y voy haciendo la traducción. Miguel Evanjuanoy is from the town of Yunguillo, the village of Yunguillo, in the Inga community of the Putumayo region of Colombia. He is currently an elder mayor, alcalde mayor, which is an important political post within the indigenous governance of his community. He is a follower of Yahe, which is distinct from being a traditional doctor, which he is not. But he is somebody who, since a young age, has taken Yahe but is not an actual practitioner. He is an environmental engineer, and since 2016, he's been involved in UMIYAC, which is the Union of Indigenous Yahe Medics of the Colombian Amazon, and he's been very involved with defending his people's land and medicine, and the work that he does is extraordinary. Miguel Evanjuanoy es originario del pueblo de Yunguillo, pueblo Inga, del Putumayo, de la Amazona colombiana. Es un alcalde mayor, que es un puesto importante dentro de la gobernanza tradicional de su comunidad. Es un seguidor del Yahe, que es distinto a ser un médico, ¿verdad? Que imparte, son pocos los que imparten el Yahe como médicos, pero desde temprana edad ha seguido lo que es esa tradición. Es un ingeniero ambiental y desde el 2016 forma parte de UMIYAC y muy importante ahí ese trabajo ha sido defensa de su territorio y de su medicina. Enseguida voy a presentar a Riccardo Vitale. Riccardo Vitale is an Italian anthropologist who, like many Europeans, has fallen in love with Latin America. He has spent 15 years doing contiguous field work in Latin America. He did his PhD at Cambridge, where he was working in Zapatista communities in Chiapas, Mexico. And he's had a deep focus on human rights and has held various positions advocating for human rights. Since 2016, he's accompanied UMIYAC. He's part of their technical committee, and he conducts research on various matters having to do with kind of the knowledge production on the outside, but very importantly, he works on making sure that that knowledge production is also being shared and returned to the communities. He is the only non-Indigenous member of UMIYAC. He was juried into the organization, which is a great honor and responsibility. Riccardo Vitale es un antropólogo italiano que, como muchos europeos, se enamoraron de América Latina. Lleva 15 años haciendo trabajo contiguo de campo en América Latina. Sacó su doctorado en Cambridge, donde su enfoque estuvo en las comunidades zapatistas de Chiapas, y desde el 2016 ha acompañado a UMIYAC. Es el único miembro no indígena de UMIYAC, y lo invitaron por un pues como jury, un jurado, que es un gran honor y también una gran responsabilidad. Y él está dedicado al comité técnico de UMIYAC, haciendo investigaciones de todo lo que está sucediendo en el mundo relacionado al Yahe, con un enfoque muy especial en asegurarse de que esa información y que esa investigación se regrese a las comunidades del Putumayo. Muchas gracias a los dos por ser parte de esta mesa y por volver a ser parte de las conferencias de Chacruna para compartir esta crítica tan importante que se ha dado a base de la globalización de la medicina del yagé, ayahuasca, y en particular hoy nos van a estar compartiendo también su visión conectada a cómo se fondea, ¿no? Esta cuestión de reclamar la forma en que también se ha ido creando esta idea de filantropía. So the focus for the table today, for the session today, has to do with the medicine, the territory, and also fundraising from a critical decolonial perspective. Welcome, Miguel, Evanjuanoy, welcome, Riccardo, Vitale.
Gracias, Diana. Entonces, thank you so much. I'll introduce our exposition. I'll take about 15 minutes, 20 maybe at the latest, at the most, and then Miguel will conclude and with a bang. But first of all, thank you very much, Diana, Negrín, for being here with us again. It's not the first time we translate for Umiyak. We specifically asked for you. We really thought that the job you did last time was outstanding. We really felt that almost nothing was lost in translation. It's difficult because it's not always literal. You need to interpret. You've done it superbly. So for that, really, thank you very much. We need to forward as well our gratitude to the Chacruna team, via they're giving us space in many occasions. It's been a very important platform. Communication, it's a crucial instrument for Umiyak, and for that we are grateful to receive your solidarity. And so we have the intention to keep walking that path of collaboration and communication with you guys. For that, thank you. Yeah, true. My name is Riccardo. I've fallen in love in America, and I will continue to do so for a while longer, I hope. But let's cut it to the chase, because we have some material that we need to cover. Umiyak is an organization. It's the Union of Indigenous Yagé Medics or Healers of the Colombian Amazon. It's comprised of 5 indigenous peoples, and I will name them: Siona, Cofán, Inga, Coreguaje, and Kamsa. It's a large network of legalized territories, ancestral sites, smaller and larger communities, and we actually span over 3 states. In Colombia, they're called departments, and those are Caquetá, Putumayo, and Cauca. It was created in 1998 with the help of an international organization, and ever since working to defend indigenous rights, earth's rights, the territory, and with a strong focus on traditional medicine. We have the subtitle for this talk. It's from tokens to agents: peace building, transitional justice, reparation, and how does reciprocity fit into this framework? First of all, let me. We, as Umiyak, rural indigenous communities, Afro communities, Mestizo communities, are living within a permanent state of emergency, a permanent humanitarian crisis, and that's important. That's an important premise. We could talk of many drivers of loss of life, loss of land, loss of culture. Okay, I will describe 7, which we think are very important and pertinent to our discussion. Loss of life, loss of territory, loss of culture, genocide, ecocide, and as we say often in Spanish, not sure that you can translate that in English perhaps, epistemicide. Number 1, mining, logging, monocultures, hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, methane, oil, cattle ranching, the meat industry, deforestation, cattle ranching. Number 5, the cocaine business, very important. And then that aberration that has become known as war on drugs, which is but in reality a chemical social warfare counterinsurgency program against vulnerable communities in South America, but also in the global north. In translation, a war on impoverished communities, a war that impoverishes communities, and a driver of tragedy for young Black and brown men in the global north and rural peasant communities in South America, mainly Colombia, which is still today the #1 producer, distributor of the alkaloid cocaine. So therefore producer of the base to produce the alkaloid. And that's a scenario. That is the scenario within which we're working. Now, there is another framework. There is a framework within that scenario, which is what, as an indigenous organization, we are reference, the line of work within which we walk as indigenous communities say. Medicinal plants, yahe mainly, is the pillar of Amazonian resistance. Through spirituality and yahe, we do peace building, we heal communities, we rebuild the social fabric, we protect the environment and community. And generally, when we, as UNIAC speak of community, we're not always only referring to the human settlement, but to the old bio-spiritual and cultural system that gives us the opportunity to breathe, live, feed ourselves, interact, be spiritual being. And then that comes together with something as well that has been painstakingly built by rural and peasant movements in Colombia, which is a framework of transitional justice. Yeah, that framework, it's important and includes another interesting notion of transitional justice, which is reparation or restorative justice, right? And then that framework dialogues with another culture, which is self-determination, autonomy, the divine law, and the fundamental thought, by which communities govern their existence. It's interesting to say, it's important to say that in years and years of working alongside communities, we learned something, that an indigenous grassroots organization, a well-organized one, is an expression, a manifestation, regarded as a manifestation and expression of divine law. It's the walk, towards liberation of Mother Earth and humanity. It's an expression of the divine. It's an ineluctable path. And some observant historians might find similarities, for example, with liberation theology And that, yes, very likely. Possibly communities along the history of Colombia and Latin America have learned from liberation theology, and liberation theology mainly learned from community resistance and community paths of liberation and strategies. So that's important. We need to point out that within the framework of autonomy, indigenous governance, and transitional justice, there is a very important, there are many, but let's speak of one specifically now. There are very important instruments that we use. One is the Resolution 004. It will make sense in a second. I will try to make a cogent argument. That is Resolution 004. Resolution 004 for indigenous people is perhaps the most important transitional justice instrument that we have. It was created thanks to the work of the communities, and then turned into a sentence by the Colombian Constitutional Court in 2009. It's a long piece of legislation which basically says one very, very important thing. 32 of the 102 indigenous peoples of Colombia are right now at risk of physical and cultural extermination, okay? And that's the wording used by the communities and by the Constitutional Court, and must not be taken lightly. Physical and cultural extermination. That's Resolution 004, Colombian Constitutional Court, 2009. The resolution gave the opportunity, in fact, actually ordered to the state to aid communities and come up with strategies, to transcend, to halt, and perhaps reverse the process of cultural and physical extermination. And that created another instrument that has to do with indigenous governance and transitional justice. And those are the safety plans, right? So 32 of the 102 indigenous peoples of Colombia have drafted, and that was a long process of collective thinking and analysis, have drafted safety plans. So there is a safety plan for each of the communities at risk of physical and cultural extermination. And then parallel to that, there is another beautiful community process, one of many, but that's an important one, which we call life plans, okay? That has to do with the past, the ancestral past, the present, and how communities see themselves projected onto the future. Basically, learning from the ancestral past to understand the present and to plan for the future. And that is very important because often when foreign aid, development, peace building, any source of intervention lands upon the communities, oh my, Miguel just disappeared from the screen.
Tú síguele, Ricardo, a ver si se vuelve a conectar. Ya está.
Okay, yo sigo. Entonces, so it's very important to keep in mind, since we're perhaps one of the themes of the conference has to do with aid, intervention, reciprocity, that the Colombian indigenous movements has been on a path that started 500 years ago of resistance, and that certainly was strengthened and perfected for at least the last 5 decades, okay? And that's very, very important. We have one priority at the moment, which is to defend the right of life, because that is the basic right that has been denied to indigenous people, rural peasants, Afro communities right now. The right to live, the right to life, and to live as communities. And then, always referring to the community as that larger spiritual, bio-cultural system that encompasses all of us. And of course, that framework of resistance and fighting struggling for the right to life implies halting, as I said before, and deterring this process of cultural and physical extermination. This is the main agenda of the Colombian indigenous movement. The Amazon rainforest, knowingly, it's a huge repository of resources and treasures, correct? And it has attracted the attention of development organizations, humanitarian organizations, conservation organizations, peace-building agencies, and so on and so forth. So it's a rather over-intervened environment. Unfortunately, the bad news, I would say, is that it isn't working. It isn't working. It simply is not working. Aid, development, conservation have not achieved the goals that they themselves designed for themselves. They haven't. In fact, unfortunately, and what I'm saying is actually based on years of fieldwork experience, studies, research done by a plethora of organizations, and most of all from communities' experiences. Okay, so basically, each step of this talk could be supported by strong arguments and references. So what we find is that mainly outside intervention weakens the resilient capabilities of communities in resistance. Why? That's a very complex question, and it needs to be analyzed case by case, but it's certainly an important question to ask. First of all, let's say that the majority of interventions, reciprocity initiatives, if you want, since it's a buzzword for this conference, are thought, designed, planned in the global north, with indigenous people in mind, of course, but they're still thought, designed, and planned in the global north. Often, in this exchange, the constitutional right that Colombian indigenous and rural community have of previous consultation, free and informed, that's what the law says, that's what also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the International Labour Organization Covenant 169 of 1989, that's what they state, that indigenous people should or have, depending on specific country we're talking about, the right to previous consultation regarding any initiative that will impact their lives, right? But what we're seeing, and this is a piece of valuable information, really needs to be scouted in everyone's books, is that this right has changed from an instrument of struggle for indigenous people into a sad joke. It's a take it or leave it relationship. Because what we see is powerful organizations, financially powerful very often, with big communication capabilities, landing upon the communities and presenting their projects. And very often the autonomy, indigenous governance, has only one option, two, either say yes or say no. And it's very difficult to say no, but it has happened. But it's very difficult to say no when you start from a point of a very, very vulnerable community for which access to liquidity, cash, is extremely scarce and extremely necessary. So often communities are forced to enter into agreements which from the start are recognized as damaging, right, for the community. And that happens on the daily basis. Miguel knows this really, really well. She's been on countless meetings with conservation organizations and state, government, local, departmental, national, and so on and so forth, arguing and thinking and really hard and analyzing really hard this context and how these policies play in indigenous communities. That's why we, as an organization, always tell our allies and potential allies, there is a framework, it's out there, it's called Do No Harm, right? It's called Do No Harm. Do no harm is something you learn. It doesn't come spontaneous, unfortunately. It requires deep understanding of the territory, and it requires 100% participation from the people that are going to be impacted by the project that you're going to propose, be it an ayahuasca center or what have you, or a development project having to do with commercialization of chocolate, corn, production of scents, what have you. That has to be taken into consideration. So you need to operate within a framework of do no harm. Otherwise, what you get is harmful intervention, or as Miguel called it the other day, harmful reciprocity. Before we can even start thinking of the notion of reciprocity, I receive mutually, and I give. We have a long way to go. We need to achieve freedom, the right to life, and perhaps an equitative societies. And then perhaps once we have walked that road, we could finally sit down around the bonfire or around the executive table, where have you, or in our backyards, and talk about what reciprocity means for communities and what reciprocity means for communities in the global north that we know very well they need it as well. Let me backtrack a little bit, and I should go a little bit faster because otherwise I run out of time. Diana, how much, do I have another 6-7 minutes?
I would say another 5 minutes at most, okay, so that we give you the rest of the time.
Yes, I'll try to be quick. I will be quick. It's important to, okay, among the 7 drivers of ecocide, genocide, epistemicide, yeah, I mentioned 2 very important notions: the cocaine business and the war, and the badly called war on drugs, that chemical counterinsurgency, social warfare that destroys community in urban inner cities in US and Europe, and rural peasants in South America. And that's one business, yeah, production, distribution, markets. And then there's another business, sorry, that's the cocaine business, right? That's the cocaine business. And then there's another business, which is the war on drugs. We started thinking of these as 2 separate, parallel, of course, very osmotic themes. Yeah, the cocaine biz and the war on drugs. And parenthesis, 10 years ago, the UNDP published a study that said that 70% of the capital, the revenues of the cocaine business are re-injected into the world's financial markets through fiscal paradises. 30%, it's spread around Latin America, you know, in the distribution chain. Interestingly, though, still today, the emphasis of the war on drugs is only rural communities. Colombia is about to reinstate glyphosate aspersion fumigations in the next few days. Just we received a donation, corporate welfare, Chomsky used to call it, US taxpayers buying weapons to be used in Latin America as counterinsurgency war on drugs aid. So we received the donation of we as Colombia received, the government received, and the communities, a blessing from the sky, poison received the donation of 5 helicopters that will be used to escort fumigation planes. Unfortunately, as we know, there's no accountability on the capital, how the capital circulate, and unfortunately, very, very little still has been done in the global north in terms of legalization and regulation of the cocaine business. We think that that is a necessity. There's not going to be peace, and Colombia won't be a sovereign country until the global north legalizes and regulates the cocaine markets. Why we're saying this here? Because we're tapping into that spirit that the psychedelic movement, the legacy of the psychedelic movement of fighting against the Vietnam War, freedom of speech, civil rights. And we think that within this space, within this movement of movements, we perhaps can find allies who are willing and able to walk that road and fight that fight, which is a very unpopular one, we know. Because one thing is to talk about decriminalizing psilocybin, much harder is to advocate for the legalization and regulation of the cocaine markets. But it has to be done. It's an unpleasant work. In Colombia, just a few weeks ago, someone proposed a law degree to regulating the production of coke and cocaine. It's something very, very important. There is a movement ready, and a large part of the indigenous movement is in agreement with that. Really quick, I'm going to cut it short because Miguel needs to speak. The thirst medicine has caused the surge of commodification, commercialization, research, medicalization, as it has happened with all or most Amazonian resources. We see that with warring eyes. Communities, Umiyak is very preoccupied about that. We sent out communiques and statements saying that we still regard that as cultural appropriation. It's a complex notion. People are arguing that many things, but we're using the instrument. We're very worried that is being put on the plants themselves, poor plants, given the responsibility to heal humanity. And we're worried about what happened with coca, and we're worried about what happened with marijuana, that was herself responsible for the incarceration, well, not her, but the mechanism around it, around its entrapment and commercialization, for the incarceration of thousands and thousands and destroying the lives of thousands and thousands of brown and black young men, not only mestizo, white, in the global north. And now coca, of course, is driver as well of destruction and loss of life and territory in the global south. And that wasn't only coca and marijuana, it was the same fate for rubber, gold, hydrocarbons. Whenever humanity and capitalism says that there is an impellent, urgent, irreplaceable need for something, that's very worrying for us. Because this is the moment to think about ultra-responsible consumption of plant medicine, indigenous tradition, but everything else, meat. So Azumi Yako, we call for, and it's not the first time, is actually de-escalation of everything pertaining to ayahuasca, research, commerce, medicalization, putting a halt to that, reducing it to the minimum possible denominator. I should finish, right, Diana? Hello?
Okay, Miguel disappeared again, but keep going and then we'll see if he's able to come back.
All right. So, what I said, ultra-responsible consumption of plant medicine, de-escalation, and deliberately we are using a bellic, a war terminology, de-escalation of everything pertaining to ayahuasca, commerce, research, medicalization, rethink fundraising and intervention, reciprocity within the framework of do no harm, within a framework of respect of autonomy and self-determination. And personally, as this is not an official position of UMIAC, but I appreciated what someone said yesterday, that perhaps the global north, has found a very interesting focus working with synthetics, LSD, MDMA, psilocybin synthetic or not. I personally think that it's a very, very interesting alternative that would give communities a little bit of respite, because we're not ready to deal with what's coming.
Ya está Miguel de vuelta con nosotros, Ricardo.
Perfecto. So nada, thank you very, very much. Just one last phrase. It's very, very important. We need to build alliances. We want to be with the Black Lives Matter movement. We want to be with the feminist movement. We want to be with the psychedelic movement. But let's not forget that we need to build unity. Because before we talk about reciprocity, we need to remove this knee from our necks, from the neck of every Colombian rural peasant, student, LGBT, community member. And we need to breathe before we can sit down, dialogue, and think together. That's more or less the gist of what I wanted to communicate. And then we'll listen to Miguel.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Muchas gracias, Ricardo, for this very important intervention. Miguel Evanjuanoy, adelante. Welcome, Miguel.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Pues, agradecerte, Ricardo, agradecerte a Diana por este espacio que nos brindas, y pues ya creo que todos ya se hizo la presentación y pienso que debemos avanzar porque pues aquí el tiempo es determinado, no es como en los territorios que cuando abrimos un espacio para tratar temas en las comunidades, pues no miramos el tiempo y no ponemos, digamos, límites. Eso es lo primero, para poder hacer bien las cosas, para poder tejer, construir una herramienta digamos, pensando en nuestras futuras generaciones, que la herramienta que se construya sea el porvenir de nuestras futuras generaciones.
So first, Miguel would like to thank everybody for the invitation and to make a note that we must move on because we have a limit in time, and that here in this type of a platform, unlike in the communities, time is very limited, whereas in the communities, it is very important to have sufficient time to speak in order to do things well, in order to weave and to build ideas in a way that permits the time and space to do so. It's an epistemic challenge.
Pues, como enseñaron y nos vienen enseñando nuestros abuelos, en primer lugar, para expresarme, quiero agradecer a la Madre y al Ser Divino por permitirnos estar congregados en esto. También agradecer a mi amiga Vida, que nos está escuchando, y a todo su equipo de trabajo de la organización, por ofrecernos el espacio para la palabra sobre la defensa biocultural indígena, la cultura y reclamar la recaudación de fondos.
So he also, as he's learned from his grandfathers and grandmothers, he is taught to thank Mother Earth and the Divine Spirit for allowing this space. And he wants to thank Dia Labachi and Chacruna for allowing this space in order to share what's happening on the territory, to share this reclamation for biocultural defense, and to reclaim what it means to raise funds within this context.
Permiso de nuestros ancestros, los espíritus, sagradas medicinales. Las y los participantes de este evento. Organización humillada. Quiero expresarles desde un sentimiento de dolor y tristeza que en este momento los padres indígenas estamos.
So with permission from ancestors and from the plants, and through his work with Umiyak, he wants to express his deep sadness for what it is that his communities are experiencing.
También como que yo mismo, ¿quién escucharán? Serán las ONGs, los amigos, para que los pueblos podamos pervivir en el tiempo. Me pregunto.
He also asks himself who it is that's listening. Is it the government? Is it the NGOs? Is it friends who want to see the territory survive?
Como hijo, verdaderamente, de las tierras ancestrales de la Amazonía, tengo grandes preocupaciones frente a la globalización y la reciprocidad indígena. Nuevamente me pregunto, ¿qué dirán las mujeres sabedoras y médicos tradicionales de plantas sagradas cuando se enteren que la planta del yagé, una planta sagrada, una planta milenaria, medicalizar? Esta planta durante toda la vida ha sido la guía espiritual para seguir luchando para la pervivencia de nuestra cultura.
Also, as a son and a guardian of ancestral territories, I ask myself, and I am worried about this medicalization, globalization, and ideas around reciprocity around Yaqui. And I ask myself, what would other people, the practitioners, the men and women of Yaqui, think about the way in which this plant is being globalized, medicalized, and placed within these frameworks of reciprocity?
Invito a los participantes a reflexionar y a preguntarse si la comercialización, la mercantilización y la extracción de conocimientos ayuda a nuestros pueblos originarios a cultivar su cultura y a pervivir en el tiempo, en paz y en armonía con los demás Madre Tierra.
I invite the participants to reflect and to ask themselves, what are the implications for the commercialization and the extraction of knowledge from these communities, and the relationship that this has for the survival in time and space and the unity of these very communities?
Esto es muy preocupante, compañeras y compañeros, lo que está sucediendo con las plantas medicinales. Vemos que la ciencia altera el conocimiento y el poder espiritual de las plantas medicinales, armonización y empobrecimiento de la madre natural, cada vez más dependiente de la salud, y aparecen más enfermedades.
He also worried about what is happening to these sacred plants. Because every time that science seems to take these plants up and study them, there's an impoverishment both of the people, the communities, and the very territories.
Con estas grandes que tenemos, que siento, digamos, quiero decir que los pueblos guardianes de las selvas amazónicas desde el año 1492 al año 2021 seguidos saqueados y exterminados por las vienen implementando el mundo, que es la Amazonía colombiana, o la Amazonía, toda la cuenca, digamos, no solamente colombiana, sino
This is, with this big interrogation, He speaks to the guardians of the Amazon, those who have been protecting the Amazonian region from 1492 until 2021, where they continue to be invaded and pillaged by neoliberal projects across the Amazonian region of Colombia.
Con estas nuevas estrategias de extracción de nuestros conocimientos, compañeros y compañeras, que milenariamente hemos perdido los territorios, conservando y protegiendo de nuestros sitios sagrados y la salud de la colectividad.
And with these new forms of knowledge extraction, what he sees is an acceleration of genocide rather than something that upholds and protects the health of the communities.
Y seguiré preguntando, compañeras y ¿por qué quieren llevar la medicina sagrada de ayahuasca sin el pueblos indígenas que milenariamente hemos buscando la protección y la de tierra?
And I ask myself, and I will continue to ask myself, why do others want to medicalize ayahuasca without the consent of the communities and of the environmental and sacred knowledge of these communities?
Quiero dejar claro en este evento muy importante para los pueblos indígenas, que nosotros los pueblos plantan porque ya existíamos y practicamos el conocimiento de las plantas maestras. Lo que sí sucedió, hay que tener con la llegada del mundo occidental y la apropiación de los recursos naturales, materiales e inmateriales en nuestros territorios.
He wants to leave clear in this event that his people and his plants were never discovered. His people and his plants already existed before colonialism, and they already practiced these medicines. But as the Western world came, there's been an invasion and an appropriation of those uses and those plants.
Entonces, compañeros y compañeras, nuevamente, invito al movimiento, a todas las organizaciones, para vivencia, verdaderamente que nos lleve a la unidad, no al exterminio, no de un pueblo que en medio de la problemática, de todos los conflictos, de poder dejar ese legado, esas herramientas, dejar naturales hacia nuestras futuras generaciones.
Comrades, compañeras y compañeros, I invite the psychedelic movement and organizations to fight for the survival of Indigenous peoples and to seek a path towards unity rather than cultural extermination. In the midst of these conflicts, they remain resistant and they want to leave tools and resources for future generations in these very communities.
Verdaderamente, por la situación que los pueblos en este momento estamos viviendo, cómo el sistema capitalista nos quiere exterminar, ver cómo el pulmón del mundo se está agotando, está muriendo, es muy preocupante. porque es considerado el pulmón del mundo, y en medio del pulmón del mundo estamos nosotros, los pueblos indígenas, perviviendo con nuestras culturas y cuidando, conservando madre tierra.
And he's very preoccupied, extremely preoccupied by the current situation that communities in the Amazon are living, specifically as the capitalist system seeks to exterminate communities who are in the lung, right? Who are part of what is considered the lung of the world, the Amazon. These communities, this region is being extinguished. And these communities are in the middle of this. They are the ones who are protecting this territory, who are protecting the lung of the world. So I think that goes back to what you saying in terms of breathing and being allowed to breathe too.
Disculpa, Diana.
No, perdón.
y también preocupación, cómo las plantas medicinales sagradas de los pueblos en esto están siendo penalizadas. ¿Por qué no digamos de que nuestras plantas medicinales, plantas, digamos, tengan esa mirada frente a la sociedad, en una sociedad que vivimos problemas? ¿Qué está pasando? Es muy preocupante en este, como la planta sagrada, la planta maestra de la coca, como el maestro del tabaco, son prácticamente ya plantas alucinógenas o psicoactivas que no nos representan ya una cultura. Es muy preocupante para las comunidades.
I see and I worry how medicinal and sacred plants are being prostituted, penalized, criminalized, and I ask why. How is it that these teacher plants are being placed in society in this way? And similar to what has happened with coca, with marijuana, and with tobacco, they are no longer representative of cultures and cultural values. And this is very worrisome.
Muy preocupante, compañero, lo que está sucediendo. Lo invito. ¿Por qué no ayudamos a despenalizar a esas plantas sagradas? ¿Y por qué no, en vez de globalizar a las medicinas sagradas del yagé, por qué no buscamos estrategias? Porque es una situación que está generando más enfermedades de los médicos. Y cada día más enfermos lo que del mundo. Entonces, y cuando se medicaliza, la planta maestra se va a convertir en un negocio. Lo van a más neochamanes. Entonces, lo que nosotros verdaderamente como pueblos indígenas solicitaríamos es regular las medicinas indígenas.
And I think, and I invite for us to think about, why don't we find strategies to regulate these plants rather than see it go into a process of medicalization, which creates dependence and more illness and spiritual disconnection. These master teachers then, through medicalization, become a business, a commerce, and we start to see more neo-shamans, right, appear. And so he invites us to think about ways in which we can regulate and protect these plants so that this type of situation does not happen to these teacher plants that are so sacred.
Nuestras herramientas herramientas únicas que nos han direccionado en seguir buscar la protección que más allá se convierta en una herramienta, doble filo, una espada, amenaza.
He says that we do not want our guides and our tools that are so unique to their people to be discarded, right? And that have guided them in their spiritual healing. And so what happens is that this becomes a double-edged sword.
Entonces, viendo de lo que en este momento está sucediendo con las plantas, yo preguntaba o reflexionaba o analizaba en una ceremonia de la medicina sagrada, del yagé. ¿Por qué quieren seguir investigando? ¿Por qué no escuchan a los pueblos indígenas? Sabiendo de que nosotros ya encontramos, ya conocemos, ya sabemos para qué usamos, para qué se utiliza la planta sagrada de maestra del yagé. Ya conocemos, sabemos. En varios espacios hemos venido hablando, expresando del conocimiento de las plantas maestras. Entonces, ¿por qué no respetamos?
And seeing what is occurring with the plants, he asked himself, and he reflected in a ceremony of yagé, why is it that people want to keep researching this rather than listen to us? Because we have already learned, we already know how and why and where to use this medicine. And for some reason, there's this propensity towards research, and in many spaces, he's been able to discuss this. They already have this knowledge. They have already produced this knowledge.
Entonces, invito a todos los que estamos aquí, que están haciendo presencia, para que caminemos juntos, verdaderamente la unidad que somos, y movimientos psicodélicos, organizaciones, en los procesos. Estamos avanzando, estamos implementando en los territorios para poder vivir en el tiempo. Nos sentimos, no somos enemigos, no queremos como nos está tratando, mirarnos como enemigos. En ningún momento nosotros queremos es cultivar conocimiento. Es el legado, siga creciendo en los territorios. Sería muy bonito conocer, sí, que conozca cómo es vivir.
I invite all of you who are watching to walk together in unity as movements and as the psychedelic movement to support the processes that they already have been implementing, the processes that these communities are trying to put into place in order to survive across time. These communities are not the enemy, just like the government has labeled them. They want to be able to cultivate their knowledge and their heritage and strengthen it. So it would be very good for the public to actually take a look at these communities and try to understand what it is like to live in this territory.
Sigo y nunca voy a quedarme callado y nunca voy a callarme. Sus grandes preocupaciones. El gobierno nos ha vulnerado. Y eso, ¿a quién nos va a escuchar? Los indígenas queremos seguir defendiendo nuestros derechos. Queremos seguir yendo Amazonía. Que una mano amiga. No queremos nuestros conocimientos se vayan a los territorios. Porque en este momento tenemos preocupaciones. Y porque ya nos está pasando con los que han llegado a las comunidades a imponer, a extraer informaciones, a llevar, a saquear nuevamente estratégicamente en nuestros territorios.
Mm-hmm. So he says he will never be silenced because he has big concerns. And the first thing is that the government is not listening. We want to defend our rights and protect the Amazon. And for that, we need a helping hand. We don't want our knowledge to be taken away from this land. And that this has already happened with some organizations that come in imposing and strategically pillaging their knowledge systems. Un par de minutos más y luego...
Invito nuevamente. Se sume a nuestro proceso, a nuestra causa. ¿Cuál es nuestro proceso? Organizativo, fortalecer la medicina, fortalecer la vida de los pueblos indígenas, fortalecer lo que tenemos dentro de los pueblos. Eso es para que nosotros pedimos.
I invite you all to be a part of our processes, of our organizations that strengthen health, that strengthen our medicine, that strengthen our life, and that strengthen our traditional governance structures. These are all key tools for our survival.
Y ya lo último, mención. Cuando se habla de reciprocidad, es muy preocupante también para las comunidades, para las organizaciones de base, porque no queremos vivir a cambio de entregar nuestras herramientas. Esa no es reciprocidad, eso es generar daño en las comunidades indígenas. Eso hay que tener en cuenta. No queremos reciprocidad con daño. Buscar la unidad verdadera en los territorios, para que podamos construir entre todos el tejido social, nuevo amanecer que todos soñamos.
And to end, he really wants to emphasize that when we speak about reciprocity, this is also worrisome, because for Indigenous communities and grassroots organizations, they do not want their knowledge to be exchanged for some semblance of reciprocity that can actually do harm rather than good. What they want to do is to strengthen their processes rather than do an exchange for something that is reciprocity, but that is not based on the very processes that they are already bringing forward and trying to advance.
Y ya para terminar, para cerrar esto, la gestión de fondos también es muy preocupante para nosotros. Es muy preocupante cómo algunas organizaciones toman la vocería de los pueblos indígenas, recaudan fondos, llegando a las comunidades indígenas. Y con eso también estamos viendo, pues, generando comunidades indígenas. También nosotros como pueblos y como hemos venido buscando fortalecer, y nosotros como pueblo tener autonomía de poder, porque siempre la propuesta y el formato se allá en los centros de los países grandes, pero no no sienten, digamos, las necesidades que hay. Entonces, en este ambiente queremos, como comunidades indígenas, esa representatividad en el momento de buscar fondos o recaudar fondos para las comunidades indígenas. Así, con ese buen entendimiento, podemos seguir tejiendo la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. And lastly, he really wants to underline how fundraising is also very worrisome, because what he has seen is intermediaries raising funds that never actually get to the communities. And these funds are also creating problems within the communities, preventing them from making their decisions in more autonomous and self-determined ways. And what he sees is that rather than developing these notions of philanthropy fundraising in the global north, where it's designed and developed by people in the global north, he wants to see representation when these funds are raised, for these funds to actually reflect the communities. That way, he believes we can walk and we can weave something together. And he says, thank you for that. So please type in your comments, your questions. And Riccardo is going to wrap up with some final thoughts. Muchísimas gracias, Miguel. Espero haber hecho justicia a tus palabras tan importantes y a este mensaje tan importante.
Gracias.
Definitivamente requiere más tiempo.
Sí, sí, un espacio de conversación a líderes indígenas y que conozcan
And he says,
la realidad de
and just kind of another indication about how hard it is to actually have this conversation with limited time, and that it's important for other Indigenous leaders to connect around this and to really discuss what is happening within this context. Riccardo, adelante.
Diana, muchísimas gracias por la traducción, muy claro. Muchas gracias, Miguel, por tus palabras, por tu claridad, por tu sabiduría y por el incansable trabajo que todos los días haces a nombre de los pueblos y para esta organización en lucha hasta siempre, para la defensa de los pueblos y de la madre naturaleza. Muchas gracias, Miguel.
Gracias. No, agradezco.
Diana, after thanking Miguel and you for this very, very important space, I think unfortunately we need to give really briefly a couple of data. Since the beginning of the year, in Colombia, we have lost a human rights defender every 2 days. Every 2 days, a piece of us, of you, is assassinated. 52 indigenous, peasants, Afro, Mestizo, students, LGBT activists have been killed since January. And that is why, unfortunately, we talk of genocide. And then along with 52 leaders, the last one was an indigenous NASA leader. She was killed 3 days ago, Sandra Liliana. Along with indigenous peasants, Afro, LGBT, human rights defenders, 21 ex-combatants, ex-guerrilla, FARC guerrilla, have been assassinated. Because we're in the hands of an economic system locally dominated by a feudal mafioso oligarchy, that has no intention of ending a perpetual war, because that war is the business, right? And they're selling an argument to the global north, which the global north created, and now it has to do with Venezuela. Colombia needs to be militarized and kept alert, in motion militarily, because local forces might be creating. This is fantastic politics. No one believes it. But big business needs it. And so they perpetuate that discourse. And that's very, very important. Sandra Liliana, that got killed 3 days ago, was a NASA leader fighting to liberate her territory from coca and narco traffickers, okay? As a response, 3 days later, thousands of NASA organized what they call it the Minga towards the inside, collective action on the inside. And they actually reclaimed part of that territory. And amazingly, because we do have the power of doing it, they apprehended the people who killed Sandra Liliana and another 7 victims as well of the armed conflicts, because surely they are peasants as well, people who were working for narco traffickers. And that's very, very important. Like a while ago, and I'll conclude again, the CRIC is the most important, the strongest political indigenous organization in Colombia. It's composed of 11 organizations. It was founded in 1971, CRIC. Sandra Liliana was a member of CRIC. About 3 months ago, 4 months ago, exactly, 4 months ago, 3 months ago, an indigenous elder from CRIC, NASA, was talking to Boaventura da Sosa, another elder, another wise elderly person, and said, Boaventura, what do we need to do? And Boaventura said, what more can you do than what you're already doing? What more can you do? If you live in a country that unfortunately is not a sovereign country, the mechanisms that enact oppression in Colombia, yeah, they are amplified and implemented by an odious local elite, but they're designed for the interests of the global north. Oil, hydrocarbon, cocaine, mining, cattle ranching, deforestation, and medicinal plants, perhaps, copper, they all go, and fuel markets in the global north. So it's important that we reflect on this. And another one last point, the fundraising, reciprocity is a very complex relationship. We're trying to navigate it. We're going to have to navigate it. We've been working with close allies like Dr. Bronnen and Riverstyx for many years. We're trying to build a system of fundraising and reciprocity, perhaps. It's too early to speak of reciprocity. But we're trying to build a system of fundraising, a dialogue where indigenous community and indigenous governance is actually part of the thinking from the very incipient moments. And that's very, very important. But so that's part as well, one of the essences of this conference, and I want to conclude with that. Thank you very much. And if there are some questions, I'm sure Miguel and I would be happy to try to answer.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Ricardo. Gracias, Miguel. Parece que hay una pregunta de Patti Valera que pregunta, ¿cuál es una manera segura de donar? What is a safe or secure way of donating? No sé si donar hacia algo en particular, pero me supongo, ¿qué es una manera que se puede apoyar monetariamente?
Ricardo, ¿estás ahí?
Sí, pero no entendí la pregunta.
La pregunta, bueno, Patti, nomás era esa, que cuál es una forma que sí se puede donar. Me imagino que bajo estas circunstancias en la que pues, puede ser para el grupo de, ok, entonces en particular, ¿cómo pueden apoyar y donar a un MIYAC?
Ok.
¿Reciben fondos del público o hay otras formas que se pueda apoyar la lucha?
Yo pienso que I think that the first step is to get close to indigenous struggle, learn a little bit about MIYAC, amplify what we're doing, and that's a very important first step. Perhaps monetary comes afterwards, and there are mechanisms. But
And I think what's key here is, you know, from what has been spoken about, is that processes to support and to be allies cannot be reduced to just making a donation, right? So I think the first step would be, and I put in the chat UMIAC's website, it's in Spanish and in English, and to start to familiarize yourselves with the work that they're doing, and then follow up if interested in supporting in some monetary way. No sé si eso ayuda un poco, ¿no? Lo esencial es entender el proceso, entender los contextos en los que están viviendo estas diferentes comunidades de la Amazonía colombiana. Are there any other questions? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Veo que, Miguel, muchos están comentando de que es bien importante, ¿no? Que están ustedes señalando la raíz de los problemas en el imperialismo, en el capitalismo, en la forma que se ha violentado el sur global, y eso se ve en los asesinatos, ¿no? Pero que esto es algo que estamos viendo en otros territorios, ¿no? Entonces están mencionando los gasoductos en Canadá, en territorio Lakota de Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y estos megaproyectos que están atravesando fronteras coloniales de alguna forma, ¿no? Y pues ustedes están tocando el meollo.
Yeah.
Okay. Hay más preguntas aquí. Ya vi. Q&A tab. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Ah, muy bien. Ok, Miguel, hablaste de la protección de los pulmones de la tierra. ¿Qué piensas sobre el COVID y su cualidad nacida en el aire?
No escuché bien, ¿cómo es?
Que si tienes alguna, hablando de los pulmones de la tierra, ¿qué es lo que opinas sobre el COVID? Como una enfermedad que se transmite.
Cuando eso es prácticamente hemos venido de la casa de remedio, la casa del saber, de la medicina sagrada. ¿Qué está pasando? Eso conectamos por la planta medicinal, por la seguir más, pero y cuál ha sido, digamos, cuando por ejemplo del COVID, esa es una estrategia también de esos estados, hablando así, para exterminar con los pueblos indígenas. No lo entiendo por qué. ¿Será que ya estamos aquí, digamos, una señal o algo que pues estamos especialmente condenados a desaparecernos?
So he says, you know,
La invasión con diferentes estrategias y siguen. Gracias.
So with regards to that question, you know, one of the things that he says is that we wind up getting disconnected, right, from the knowledge that these plants have to offer us by always wanting to consume more, which actually creates illness. And it seems in some strange way that COVID seems to be another sign of indigenous extermination, another sign that's coming to them about the need to have resilience, to protect themselves, another threat that is being very specifically directed, disproportionately affecting indigenous communities. There's a very important question from Lucas Maya, una pregunta muy interesante de Lucas Maya. Miguel, para ti, ¿qué significa o cómo puede regularse el IAG? Para ti, ¿cómo se debería de regular?
Ver. Medicina, ¿por qué nosotros estamos hablando de regular? De la medicina. Porque, primero que todo, es la medicina de los pueblos ya prácticamente pensando que están medicando y está tomando un concepto de negatividad con las malas prácticas. Lo estamos. Entonces, para que no tengan tu vida como hablamos de regular la medicina. Entonces, para regular la medicina, lo primero que tenemos que sentarnos es con nuestras abuelas, abuelos, líderes, lideresas, autoridades. Cómo nosotros como pueblos indígenas debemos tener el comportamiento frente a la medicina y cómo debe ser el manejo y el uso de la medicina sagrada de los pueblos indígenas. Porque es muy preocupante en este momento por las malas prácticas. La medicina tiene otro nombre, porque lo estamos viendo. Falsos chamanes que solamente buscan personas generar ganancia. Como la medicina sagrada, siendo sagrada, ya está siendo vista por la sociedad. Entonces, nosotros como pueblos, y no solamente pueblos, sino invitando, digamos, a las diferentes organizaciones, amigos, amigas, y sentarnos con el Estado, a ver, buscar estrategias. A la planta sagrada, o ahora que no es sagrada como la coca, que se vuelva una herramienta de doble espada, porque ahora no se puede cargar la coca, ahora es muy delicado cargar la hoja de coca. La humanidad no ha podido interpretar, no ha podido comprender y no ha podido hacer las buenas prácticas de las plantas sagradas, la madre tierra, en parte.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Miguel. So what he's saying is that first, the commercialization, the medicalization, and the poor practices that have become associated with ayahuasca have become incredibly problematic. What he sees is necessary with regulatory frameworks is that there needs to be an avoidance of this prostitution, right, where we see neo-shamans entering into this with very personal kind of interests. And this is creating a bad name for this plant, for this sacred plant. It's creating negative views of the medicine. So what he believes is that we need to be able to sit with the elders, with the traditional authorities, in order to really think through and observe how to manage this medicine. And he thinks that in addition to this, right, in addition to the elders and to the traditional authorities sitting down in a more assembly type format to really talk through this, that organizations and the government need to be at the table in order for them to find a regulatory strategy so that this medicine doesn't become a double-edged sword as we have seen with coca. So that's the summary of that. There are a couple of other questions. Let's see, from Deva. How could people in urban areas interact and learn from and with communities with deeper and better respect? So this is a big question. Una pregunta de Deva Uta. ¿Sí? ¿Quieres decir algo, Ricardo, sobre la regulatoria?
Just really quick.
Okay.
In 1995, when Canada, US, and Mexico signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, a little bit later, corn producers in Mexico were obliged, forced to buy genetically modified seeds that couldn't reproduce. Yeah, and they were forced to compete with the global market. They were buying seeds that they actually created through thousands of years of experimentation that have been modified and couldn't reproduce, so they were locked into a market. And their government participated into that. And a while ago, an indigenous healer said something funny, but not that funny. He said, it's not unthinkable, in fact, it's very plausible and possible, a scenario in which a few years down the line, some powerful NGO will come to our communities offering spiritual PTSD healing to victims of war, and ironically, communities, we will say yes. Yeah, that's what he said. We will say yes, because they will bring a better, medicalized, safer Yahe. Just that.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Entonces, la última pregunta, nomás para cerrar rápidamente. Miguel, te preguntan si hay una forma de que los de fuera, sea personas urbanizadas o personas que simplemente no son de las comunidades del Putumayo, ¿hay alguna forma que ellos pueden interactuar de una forma más respetuosa con las comunidades? Es una gran pregunta, claro.
Es una gran pregunta contestarla.
Sí.
Pues mira que no estoy diciendo y hablando. La medicina, no todos estamos enfermos. La medicina igual no es para todos y para todas. La medicina es para que entiendan a las abuelas y a los abuelos que milenariamente han practicado. ¿Qué dicen? Es especialmente para curar las enfermedades. ¿Cuál es el territorio? Para proteger al territorio. Pero más no generar negocios. Y la medicina no. Eso es, digamos, muy de nosotros, de los pueblos que conocemos. La medicina, yo no puedo en este momento decir siempre venía hablando también. ¿Quiénes son las máximas, los responsables, las que practicar una buena práctica con las medicinas claras del Yahe? ¿Quiénes? Son personas responsables, personas que son reconocidas por el pueblo para compartir la medicina sagrada. Más no desconozco, digamos, de que tengo varios años en tengo mis 30 y sigo en este proceso, pero en ningún momento me da las atribuciones de compartir la medicina, porque y me he educado con claridad quiénes pueden tomar, digamos, medicina, quiénes pueden la ceremonia medicina sagrada, porque hay que podemos ir tomando todas las personas. Eso es un proceso de toda una vida. Eso sería para...
Y es una fantástica forma, yo creo que de concluir, porque ya tenemos que cerrar, hay mucho más que decir, entonces lo voy a traducir rápidamente. What Miguel would like to just emphasize, because we are past time, is that we have been saying that this is a medicine, Yahe is a medicine. It isn't for everyone. It's something that is for the sick. Not everybody is sick. The elders and the practitioners see this as a curative element, as a curative plant for health and for the territory, not for business. So those who are responsible and who can practice this responsibly understand that it takes a whole lifetime of knowing and learning how to practice it. Not everybody can practice it. Not everybody should necessarily take it. And he, despite 36 years of being a part of the community and having experience with it, has never put himself in the position to administer it to other people. There is an ultimate respect that needs to be given towards the sacred and towards those who cultivate this knowledge and understand how to administer it to the sick, and it takes a whole lifetime in order to get there. Muchísimas gracias, Riccardo Vitale, Miguel Evanjuanoy. Muchas gracias, UMIYAC, por el trabajo que están haciendo para resguardar el territorio, para resguardar esta medicina y para luchar por la descolonización últimamente. Entonces, thank you so much, y Miguel, for protecting the territory, the medicine, and to
Muchas gracias. Bye.